At the toy donation drive, everyone thought she was just an ordinary volunteer. But when an armed group storms the place trying to steal supplies, she reacts with military precision. A veteran there recognizes her stance and, almost unable to believe it, asks what her call sign was. When she answers, the mood changes completely. She leads the evacuation, neutralizes the threat, and ensures the safety of dozens of children. Her true identity turns that quiet night into a lesson in courage and redemption. Before we begin, hit subscribe and tell me what city you're watching from. Every new voice helps keep these American redemption stories alive. Welcome to the mission now, let's begin. The community center smelled like coffee, popcorn, and freshly mopped floors. Colorful balloons and crooked Christmas lights tried their best to brighten the peeling walls. Tables piled with toys turned that simple space into a temporary paradise for the neighborhood kids. Amelia lined up little toy cars in neat rows, almost perfectly straight. She said it was just an organizing habit, but it was more than that. The more she focused on the toys, the less she heard the rain on the roof turning into helicopter blades in her memory. Here, she was just the lady with the boxes. No one asked about rank, missions, or reports. Leaning against a column, Miles pretended to review a clipboard. He wore a volunteer badge, but the way his eyes scanned the room gave away the vet. He noticed details other people missed. How Amelia always kept an eye on the exits. How she avoided having her back to the main door. Emma crossed the room with a slight limp, handing out bags and smiles. A banner from the non-profit Veterans in Action hung behind her, reminding everyone that many there had seen things a lot worse than a donation line. Since leaving the hospital, Emma had thrown herself into the non-profit as her way of still serving. Near the entrance, a man in a simple blazer and official-looking badge signed forms with the staff, Agent Cole Maddox. Officially, he was checking donation logistics. Off the record, he was quietly inspecting barcodes on some of the boxes, comparing them in his head to patterns he'd been investigating for months. Amelia avoided looking his way for too long. People with clipboards and authority usually came with questions that poked at parts of her life she preferred buried. Among toy boxes, she could pretend she was just another volunteer with free time. When the rain picked up, the noise on the roof turned into an uneven drum. A little girl walked up hugging a giant teddy bear almost her size. "Ma'am, can I take this one?" she asked, shy smile and all. Amelia tied a quick ribbon around the bear's neck and handed it over like she was passing along something far bigger than stuffing and fabric. For a few moments, everything felt simple. Toys being given away, kids laughing, adults saying, "Thank you." It was the kind of life she would have killed and died to protect if she'd had the choice. But an old feeling started poking at her from the inside, a faint knot in her stomach. It wasn't fear. It was that inner radar whispering, silently, that the peace here was more fragile than it looked. Years earlier, the scene was completely different. No balloons, just blades. No folding tables, just a noisy hangar. Amelia stood in the operations room, staring at screens as the radar painted the sky with storms that looked ready to swallow anything that dared to climb. Data jidding, dense clouds, crosswinds, visibility dropping fast. She compared it to reports from previous missions. In conditions like that, the procedure was simple: delay. It had nothing to do with bravery and everything to do with statistics. And she'd always played on the side where people came back breathing. "I recommend postponing takeoff by 24 hours, she said firmly in the briefing room. One major nodded quickly. Another pretended not to hear. The problem wasn't the weather. She knew. It was the clock, and pressure from people who wouldn't be in the helicopter if things went bad. In the hangar, Emma tightened her tactical vest with a crooked grin. "If I come back without a scratch, you owe me coffee," she joked to Miles, who calmly checked gear with the confidence of someone who trusted the process. They knew Amelia never let anything launch without fighting for safety first. That trust didn't show up on letterhead, but it was there. Colonel Richard Kessler walked in a few minutes later. Impeccable uniform, leather briefcase. the face of a man convinced he was always 2 steps above criticism. "This mission does not get delayed," he announced. "We've got sensitive cargo tied to an international contract. If we're late, we lose credibility. And I don't lose credibility." Amelia presented the data. She showed the radar screen, the weather bulletins, the wind projections. "Sir, conditions are outside ideal parameters. I formally request a delay." Kessler didn't bother pretending to study it. "Your opinion is noted. The decision is mine. The mission goes." A maintenance alert popped up in the system. A request for an extra inspection on a critical helicopter component. Amelia felt her heart tighten. Before she could act, Kessler grabbed the technician's tablet, typed in a high-level password, and changed the status to wave by superior order. He handed the tablet back as casually as if it were a coffee cup. "Everything's fine, Lieutenant." "Don't be dramatic." When the helicopter lifted off, Amelia stayed in the ops room, headset pressed to her ears. She heard the pilot talk about turbulence stronger than forecasted. "She request route, then altitude." She heard Emma's voice on the radio, trying to keep things light even as everything shook way too much. The last clear sound was a tense request to abort the mission and divert. Then static. A half scream, a distant impact, and then silence. Not the normal end-of transmission kind, but the heavy silence where every voice you're supposed to hear just disappears, at once. In that moment, Amelia knew someone would pay for it. And she also knew, with a bitter certainty, that Kessler's name had a much better chance of disappearing from the paperwork than hers. The days that followed were a blur of cold hallways, overpowered AC, and coffee long past fresh. Amelia realized she wasn't in an investigation searching for truth. She was in a process looking for a scapegoat. Maintenance documents showed up with missing pages. System logs revealed after-hours access edits in mechanics' notes. The line showing the inspection as waived by superior order had conveniently vanished. When she asked about it, she got the same answer over and over. System error, delivered with practiced indifference. Every meeting circled the same question, just worded differently. Why wasn't the mission cancelled? When Amelia presented her postponement recommendations, she got vague nods and pens scribbling without eye contact. When she mentioned Kessler's direct order to keep the mission, the subject was quickly brushed aside. "We're not here to analyze rank, Lieutenant." A braver technician confirmed what she already suspected, in private. "Only Colonel and above can waive that kind of inspection," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "But if you put my name on anything, I'll deny it. I've got a family." Meanwhile, Emma was grinding through painful physical therapy, trying to recover what she could of her legs. Amelia thought about visiting her, then backed out every time. It wasn't indifference. It was shame. She was convinced that if Emma saw her in that doorway, all she'd see was the person who hadn't stopped the flight. Miles tried, in his own way, to break through in smaller meetings. He talked about Amelia's long track record of caution. He reminded people how she delayed missions before, even when it annoyed powerful officers. He mentioned witnesses who'd heard her push to postpone that day. Every effort hit a wall of formality and bounced back. The final report arrived with a polished cover and rotten core. Whether conditions were mentioned, only as an aggravating to cancel. Amelia's postponement requests were reduced to a timid line in the middle of the text. The heart of the document pointed to operational risk assessment failure by the responsible officer, name included. Nothing about the waived inspection. Nothing about a colonel's password. Nothing about schedule pressure. Just the comfortable narrative of individual human error. The system exhaled in relief. On paper, it was safe. Seeing her call sign, redemption, listed as a mere curiosity stung in a particular way. In the hallways, the nickname turned into ammo. Where's redemption now? They joked. Didn't redeem anyone this time. The name that once meant victory in hard missions now stuck to her like a cruel punchline. Gradually, Amelia was pushed out of field operations. In their place came stacks of paperwork, admin tasks, meetings where no one asked what she thought. It's not punishment, just reassignment, they said. She understood it was a polite way to move her out, without admitting that the real problem wore a higher rank. When she finally requested full separation, the paperwork flew as if it had been waiting in a drawer. There was no farewell ceremony. There didn't need to be. The system had what it wanted, one person to carry the weight of the blame alone, while the colonel kept signing off missions. Back at the community center, the rain on the roof made the air hum. Amelia straightened a stack of board games and instinctively stepped away from the middle of the room, choosing a spot where she could see the main entrance, the side door, and if she angled herself a rear exit. Miles noticed. He walked over with a crooked smile. "You know, this is just a rec center, not a forward operating base, right?" he teased. She shrugged. "Old habit." He added, more seriously, "Old habit that saved a lot of people. Could be worse." Near the entrance, Emma managed the line of families with makeshift badges. Every now and then, she glanced at Amelia and recognized a familiar set of gestures. The way she measured distance with her eyes, checked routes, counted people without making it obvious. Cole moved between the boxes with a casual air. He lifted labels, wrote down numbers in a small notebook, asked a few innocent questions about where donations came from. His expression, though, belonged to someone cross-referencing it all with something much bigger. He already knew some of those codes weren't random. A stronger gust of wind flickered the lights. Kids reacted with spontaneous squeals, thinking it was fun. Amelia, out of reflex, looked up at the ceiling, then at the exits. She walked over to the side door and shoved a stack of boxes away from half the doorway. "Better keep this clear," she told another volunteer, as if it were just generic caution. On her way back, a mom hugged her quickly, tearful but smiling, thanking her for the toy her daughter had just received. "You have no idea what this means to us," the woman said. Amelia, inconfortable. She knew exactly what that kind of moment meant, and she knew exactly what it felt like to watch everything like that get destroyed by decisions made far away. The sound of the rain seemed to grow along with something inside her. It wasn't superstition. It was years of reading rooms and situations. Her body felt a shift in the air that her eyes hadn't confirmed yet. That internal radar she kept trying to shut off started whispering again. For a second she considered telling Miles, saying something like something's off, but she swallowed it. She didn't want to be the paranoid one in the room. Not here. Not today. Not at an event where she finally felt most normal. The world, unfortunately, wasn't interested in whether she was ready for another crisis. The first warning was a heavy slam against the main door, like someone had thrown a shoulder into it with everything they had. The second came as shattered wood flying into the room. The music cut mid-note. Conversations turned into screams. 3 armed men rushed in, scanning the room with tense eyes. 2 more stayed at the entrance, blocking anyone who tried to get close. Everybody to the middle. On the floor, barked the one who seemed to be in charge, firing a single shot into the ceiling. The echo of the gunshot killed whatever was left of party mood. Parents pulled their kids close. Some dropped to the floor, others froze. Children started crying, not understanding why joy had suddenly turned to terror. The sound of tipping chairs, rolling toys, and choke sobbing filled the space. Amelia felt the shift inside her like a switch flipping. Her body went into full alert mode. She started counting automatically. Doors, windows, gunmen, distances, routes. Whether she wanted it or not didn't matter. This was simply how her brain knew to work. Miles saw it in her eyes. In a heartbeat, she wasn't just the volunteer arranging toys anymore. She was the officer he remembered from other missions, running invisible calculations. He moved closer, pretending to help an older man crouch down, really just getting into position to hear any orders from her. The invaders started tearing through the boxes. Not all of them, you idiots. Just the marked ones. The leader yelled, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and checking codes. The way he ignored most toys and zeroed in on specific labels flipped another switch in Cole's mind. From where he stood, Cole caught a glimpse of the sequence of letters and numbers on that paper. His trained brain connected the dots almost instantly. Those codes looked way too much like supply route identifiers he'd been tracking in military embezzlement cases. This was no random smash and grab. In the middle of the panic, Amelia started acting quietly. She touched shoulders, whispered quick instructions: "Get down with your kids. Don't run yet. Stay by the table." Little islands of order formed in the chaos. People obeyed more because of the calm authority in her tone than the actual words. The gunmen believed they owned the room through sheer firepower. They didn't realize that under all the fear, a second structure was forming silent, discreet, and far more experienced at handling danger than any of them, while the armed men cursed and ripped open boxes looking for codes they barely understood. Amelia moved among the hostages with precision. Miles reached her side, still holding onto an older woman for cover, but his eyes locked onto hers. "You're in ops mode," he murmured, barely moving his lips. "What was your call sign again, before all that crap?" The question hit her like a jolt. For a moment the twinkling party lights blurred into the harsh glare of a hangar, and she could almost smell fuel. Her first instinct was to deny it, curl inward, pretend she'd never had one. But there was no accusation in Miles' eyes-only recognition. He knew the version of her that never made it into the official reports. And right now, he needed to know if that version was the one in charge. "Redemption," she finally replied. The word came out low, almost swallowed by the room noise, but it landed like a grenade. Miles exhaled slowly, as if confirming a long-standing suspicion. "Knew it," he said. "Then do what you do. I'll follow." Emma, close enough to hear the name, felt a chill down her spine. She was back in the helicopter for a heartbeat, hearing the same voice over the radio begging to abort the mission. Later, they told her that voice was the reason everyone almost died. Her memory and the official story no longer matched. Cole didn't get the full context, but he heard the word and stored it. He remembered a painful accident report involving an operations officer named Amelia, tied to the call sign Redemption. The paper's portrait of her didn't match the woman he was watching calmly manage hostages. For Amelia, saying that name out loud was like ripping the lid off a trunk she'd been sitting on for years. But as she looked around at scared faces, hunched bodies, kids hiding behind tables, she knew something else. If she let the past dictate her actions now, everyone here would be at the mercy of pure luck again. She straightened her posture. The fear was still there, pulsing in the background, but now it had company. If her past had come back to collect, she decided in that moment it wouldn't be as a victim. If that call sign existed at all, it was going to be for something better than a bitter line in a false report. With the name accepted, Amelia's mind shifted into high gear. She mentally divided the room like a tactical map, danger zone is shielded corners, shortest paths, exits. From then on, every move had its place in that invisible strat. She leaned over small groups, giving crisp instructions: "Stay near that table. When I signal, you go with him. Don't argue, just move." People obeyed. Something in her voice sliced through the paralysis more effectively than screaming ever could. She asked Miles to start concentrating parents with kids near the left side of the room, close to the door she'd cleared earlier. "Make it look like you're just comforting them," she told him. He moved through the room, hugging, touching shoulders, quietly nudging the human flow where it needed to go. Emma, using her role as organizer, invented a game corner in that same area. She invited the kids over, suggesting a quick game where everybody stays really close together and low to the ground. At the same time, her eyes calculated how much time she'd need to move them out if a gap opened, focused on the boxes. The thieves missed the choreography happening under their noses. The leader raged about the mess, yelled at his crew for not finding the right codes, waved his gun around more out of insecurity than strategy. To him, the hostages were just a shapeless crowd, which made it easier for them to reorganize without being noticed. Cole approached Amelia when one of the men got distracted by his radio. The codes on that sheet match supply routes under investigation. He muttered, "This is too big to be a coincidence." She gave a small nod. "I still scanning the room." Then tonight isn't just a bad night. It's a chance to pull the thread. Even in the middle of all that tension, the old guilt tried to drag her down. What if it goes wrong? What if someone dies, and it's on you again? But every time that thought pushed forward, she'd catch sight of a kid clutching a teddy bear and know that doing nothing would be the worst choice of all. While the gunman leaned on fear and bullets, Amelia was quietly controlling something much more powerful: how people responded to the fear. Steppy by steppy, she was aboard, where one right move could flip the entire night. The search for the right boxes got rougher. The leader started shoving stacks over, kicking aside anything that didn't match his paper. Not those. The marked ones. Damn it! He yelled, glancing again and again at the scribbled list of codes he barely understood. Amelia caught a clear look at some of those sequences. It was like seeing an old language she hadn't read in years, letters, and numbers laid out in that distinct logic of military supply routes. They weren't the exact codes from the helicopter mission, but they were close enough to be family. Cole quietly confirmed it. "I've seen these combinations in transport contracts I'm investigating," he said under his breath. "Overpriced donations. Shipments that leave bases as aid and disappear on the way. These boxes are part of something a lot bigger than food and gifts." One of the gunmen grabbed his radio with shaking fingers. The voice on the other end wasn't crystal clear, but a few words sliced through the static. "Move faster. No loose ends. The colonel doesn't want trouble." The way he saw, the colonel didn't sound generic. It sounded personal. Amelia didn't need a last name. The memory of Kessler waiving an inspection with a few taps on a screen came rushing back: his cold orders, his contempt for warnings, his knack for twisting protocols into weapons to protect his schedule. It was the same mold. Cole, who'd seen Kessler's name lurking in the shadows of numerous documents, connected the rest. The colonel's approvals always showed up next to the fishiest routes, the shadiest contracts. Now, it wasn't just something on paper. There were armed men in a community center answering to the colonel. It was becoming obvious. This wasn't a random crew looking for things to fence later. This was part of a carefully managed operation to erase physical evidence of a scheme years in the making. If those boxes vanished or turned up empty, one more piece of the trail would vanish with them. For Amelia, that realization came with a sour dose of déjà vu. Once again, ordinary lives were caught in the crossfire of a plot designed in offices far removed from any real risk. The difference this time was simple and huge. She wasn't bound by anyone's orders. When the leader yanked a man out of the crowd and pressed a gun to his head, the whole room seemed to shrink. The silence that followed the screams was even worse, a heavy, waiting silence that said, "If no one moves, something awful will happen." Amelia's body went cold, but her thoughts sharpened. If he shot someone now, pure panic would explode. Any chance of controlled evacuation would vanish. She looked at Emma, who was clutching the kids close, then at the cluster of people Miles was holding together. This was it. No more delaying decisions. Miles edged closer, still pretending to steady an older woman. "If you go talk to him, I'll watch your back," he murmured. It wasn't bravado. It was the muscle memory of countless times he'd followed her lead in loud, dangerous spaces. Amelia rose slowly, hands slightly visible, placing herself between the leader and most of the hostages. The gun swung toward her, just as she expected. "Don't move!" he shouted. "One more step and I drop you." The barrel shook less like a professional and more like someone fraying at the edges. "You're already in over your head," she said, voice steady but not loud. "If you kill someone here, you're just another psycho shooting civilians. If you get what you came for and leave without blood, maybe you still have an angle. The way you're searching, you won't find it by sunrise." He snorted. "And you know what we came for, huh?" Amelia flicked her chin toward the sheet of codes. "I know those numbers weren't printed for a toy drive. And I know you Can't read them. You're guessing. A vein bulged in his neck. In the back, Emma began moving kids in small groups, as if just reorganizing the room. Let's go play a game over there real quick, she whispered. Alert parents helped, masking the motion with hugs in their own bodies. Look around, Amelia continued. You've got, what? 5 guys with guns, 2 or 3 real exits. How long you think you've got before someone outside calls the cops? Without the right boxes, you're not walking out of here anywhere but a cell. His jaw clenched. The radio voice still echoed in his head. The colonel doesn't want loose ends. Get it done. Fear of failing that unseen figure was almost as strong as fear of getting caught. Amelia saw the crack and pushed. Take me to the storage room and I'll show you what matters, she said. You get time. I get time. Everyone breathes a few more minutes. He cursed under his breath, shoved the hostage back into the crowd, and jerked his head at her. Move. 2 with me. The rest, keep your eyes on these people. The hallway to the storage area was narrow, lit by flickering fluorescent tubes. The rain was a muffled backdrop now. In its place, the echo of footsteps and the metallic rattle of weapons filled the space. Amelia walked ahead, forcing herself to look more shaken than she truly was. Inside the storage room, organized chaos ruled. Tall metal shelves carved out tight aisles, stacked with boxes up to the ceiling. Colorful labels dotted the brown cardboard in what looked like random patterns. To an untrained eye, it was just a messy supply room. To Amelia, it was a maze full of leverage points. The leader shoved her father inside. Show me what to take, he growled. 2 of his men posted up at either end of the aisle, guns at low ready. She moved slowly, pretending to study labels out loud, as she actually checked how stable the piles were. One cluster of larger boxes deeper in caught her eye. They leaned in a way she didn't like, in a way that said one wrong push could bring the whole stack down. Nearby, a set of bolts on a shelf bracket looked worn, barely holding. A hazard, sure, but also an opportunity. Through gaps between boxes, she caught movement. A familiar shape slid down a side aisle. Miles, creeping in behind the shelves, using the initial chaos as cover. Farther back, a stiffer silhouette Cole kept to the shadows, but close enough to intervene. The leader muttered, annoyed. You jerking me around. If you're playing games, I'll leave you under this crap and walk out without you, he threatened. Amelia pointed to a stack whose code she genuinely recognized as part of the scheme. These are in the right range, she said. But you're gonna want more than that. She slowly steered the trio toward the unstable stack. Every step was a calculation. Too obvious, and they'd sense something. Too cautious, and she'd miss her window. One wrong move, and the wrong people would get crushed, or she'd be pinned and useless. Inside, adrenaline surged, but so did a strange calm. This was the kind of situation she'd been trained for. Tight quarters, armed enemy, hostages depending on fast decisions. The difference was huge, though this time, no colonel could override her call. She stopped near the stack she'd chosen. The world narrowed. Her, the leader, the boxes, the 2 other guns. Whatever she did next would set everything in motion. There was no backing out now. Amelia pretended to lean on a shelf to read a label better. In reality, she was feeling for the weak point in that wobbly stack. Her fingers found the slight gap between 2 big boxes. She gave it a clumsy-looking shove, like someone losing balance. Physics handled the rest. The boxes shifted, slowly at first, then all at once. One hit another, which dragged 3 more. Within seconds, a small avalanche of cardboard and contents thundered down into the aisle, burying the area in noise and chaos. The leader stumbled, arm flying up to shield himself. One of the gunmen landed flat on his back, flailing to avoid being crushed. The other turned his head just long enough not to see the shadow bearing down on him. Miles took advantage, driving him to the ground with a solid, practiced hit. A gun spun out of someone's hand and skidded across the concrete until it stopped near a side shelf. Cole dove for it, almost slipping, and wrapped his fingers around the grip before anyone else got close. Training kicked in. Barrel up, eyes locked, breath forced into something like steady. Stunned but stubborn, the leader managed to squeeze off a shot in Amelia's direction. The impact in her shoulder felt like a sledgehammer. Heat spread fast under her sleeve. The floor seemed to tilt, trying to pull her down, but she refused to go completely under. Out in the main room, the sound of that shot from the back sent fear spiking again. One of the remaining gunmen panicked and grabbed a small boy, yanking him forward. Nobody moves. He screamed, using the kid as a shield. The gun barrel trembled near the boy's head. Emma watched it unfold as if watching the worst day of her life on replay. But this time, she wasn't strapped to a seat in a spinning aircraft. She had solid ground under her feet and a choice in front of her. She launched herself toward the boy, using her fall as momentum. The shot fired, but hit nothing. Emma yanked the child down and covered him with her own body. Parents and volunteers nearby, running on a wild mix of terror and courage, piled onto the gunman, dragging him to the floor. The gun was kicked away, skidding across the tiles before slamming into a wall. Back in the storage room, Amelia forced herself to breathe. The pain in her shoulder was sharp, but her vision was clear enough to see the leader half buried in boxes, straining toward a pistol just out of reach. She knew she had seconds to finish this before he got another chance. With the leader partially pinned, Amelia made a quick call. He still had one free arm, and the pistol was dangerously close. If he wriggled loose, the whole fight could turn again. She wasn't about to let that happen. Above him, a large box was balancing precariously, supported by the edge of a shelf. If it dropped, it would land right on his free arm, ignoring the fire. In her shoulder, Amelia grabbed the shelf with her good hand and yanked. The box slipped and crashed down. His scream tore through the room. The arm that had been reaching for the pistol went limp, trapped under the weight. The gun slid out of his fingers and scraped across the floor, coming to a stop much closer to Amelia than to him. She bent carefully, picked it up and stepped back, keeping it trained in his direction. She didn't have to shoot. The message was enough. All the power he'd walked in with now pointed straight back at him. Miles finished restraining the other gunman with improvised zip ties someone had grabbed from an organizer kit. Cole, clutching the weapon he'd seized earlier, held it steady on the third man. "It's over," he said mostly to himself, but the words settled heavily in the air. In the main room, whispers started to spread. They got some of them. They're disarming them. Police sirens finally cut through the sound of the rain. Thanks to frantic, hidden calls and quick texts from outside, patrol cars had made it to the scene. Within minutes, lights flashed through the front windows. Cole waved officers into the storage room and pointed out the marked boxes. "These are top priority," he stressed. "Everything gets logged. Nothing leaves without a chain of custody. And I want copies of every single record." He knew those boxes held more than stolen goods. They were physical links to a much larger crime. Leaning against a shelf, Amelia felt her body start to come down from the adrenaline high. Her shoulder throbbed and her knees wobbled, but as she looked around, she saw something that hadn't existed on the day of the crash. Living enemies in handcuffs, preserved evidence, and, most important of all, no dead civilians under her watch. She closed her eyes for a brief moment and let the word redemption echo inside. For the first time in a long time, it didn't sound like a cruel joke. Hours later, the community center looked like a battlefield after the smoke cleared. Ambulances idled outside. Officers moved through the room. Kids wrapped in foil blankets clung to parents. Toys lay scattered across the floor among fallen chairs and empty cups. The smell of popcorn mixed with the sharp edge of adrenaline. Amelia sat against a wall, shoulder wrapped in a temporary bandage. The medic had already told her she needed a hospital, but she'd bargained for a little more time. She wanted to see people walk out of there on their own feet. She needed that image burned into her mind. Miles stayed close, the same way he had on their worst deployments. Every now and then, someone approached Amelia, struggling to find words. "You helped save my kids," a mom said, voice cracking. Amelia gave a small nod uncomfortable with any word that sounded like hero. Outside, reporters tried to snag statements. The nonprofit's staff argued in tense whispers about how to deal with the sudden media attention. Some volunteers swore they'd never step inside that building again. Others already talked about stricter safety, more vet involvement, and turning trauma into action. Cole walked over with his notebook, but crouched down in front of Amelia instead of looming above her. Amelia, or should I say redemption, he asked with a tired, lopsided smile. She rolled her eyes lightly. Depends. Which report is this going in? One that, for once, might actually tell the whole story, he answered. He flipped the notebook open, showing some of the code scribbled inside. These sequences link your crash, these boxes, and a whole string of contracts approved by the same colonel. This isn't random, and now, nobody can pretend it is. Emma passed nearby with a child on her hip. She stopped for a heartbeat and met Amelia's eyes. For a second it looked like she might speak. Instead, she just nodded gratitude and recognition wrapped into one simple motion. It said more than a speech could have. The room slowly emptied. Kids went home, some still clutching the toys they'd gotten before everything went sideways. Despite the fear, the nonprofit's volunteers had already started cleaning, righting chairs, and picking things off the floor. Like physically rebuilding the place was part of their healing. When they finally convinced Amelia to head out for proper medical care, she left the building with one thought pounding in her mind. If her past had decided to cross her path again, maybe it was time to stop running from it and start chasing it down. In the weeks that followed, what happened at the community center stopped being just a local news story. The seized boxes were catalogued and cross-referenced with old records. The codes Amelia and Cole had recognized under pressure turned out to be critical tiles in a much bigger mosaic. Internal reports that used to mention only higher authority started naming names. Colonel Richard Kessler, waived inspections, like the one before the crash, appeared linked to donation shipments with inflated values and suspiciously altered routes. Emma was called in to give an official statement. The room looked a lot like the ones from years ago, but the attitude inside was different. This time, they asked what she remembered, not what fit. She described Amelia's voice over the radio, repeatedly calling to abort the mission, and the uneasy feeling among the crew when the order to launch still stood. I thought if I talked about it, they'd say it was trauma making stuff up, she admitted. The investigator kept writing, not dismissing. Your memory lines up with system logs. This isn't in your head. For the first time, someone validated what she'd carried alone since the crash. Miles backed up the same story. In his statement, he didn't just outline the day of the accident, he walked them through Amelia's whole career. Missions she delayed for safety, arguments she had with Brass over unnecessary risk. He also mentioned overhearing Kessler gripe about her being too cautious in the hallways. In a comfortable office far away, Kessler watched a news anchor talk about an alleged supply diversion scheme tied to a senior officer. They didn't say anything to need them to. His hand tightened into a fist as he called someone, demanding to know how old files had resurfaced. The answer was blunt. Court order. Sir. For the first time, the colonel felt his uniform weigh differently. Not as a shield, but as a target. He'd always bet on how hard it was for systems to point fingers upward. Now, he had to watch as physical evidence, digital records, and overlapping testimonies slowly drew a circle around him. One day, before another hearing, Amelia met Emma outside the building. The breeze was mild, no storms in sight. Back then, in the helicopter, I heard you trying to get us out, Emma said. No small talk. Today, I watched you get kids out of a room with guns pointed at them. I needed you to hear that. Amelia swallowed. And I needed to say I'm sorry for disappearing after the crash. She replied. I couldn't look at you without seeing what I thought I'd done. Emma shook her head. What you did back then and now was fight a system that found it easier to blame you than fix itself. You're not fighting it alone anymore. They hugged. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic embrace. just a short firm one that carried years of weight being divided at last. When they pulled apart, Amelia realized that no matter what the final legal outcome was, a major battle inside her had already turned in her favor. The renovated community center almost looked like a different place. Reinforced doors, small cameras in strategic corners, clear emergency exits. A discreet plaque by the entrance read, "They tried to silence a community here. The community chose to speak louder." After the attack, the nonprofit had come close to shutting down. Meetings were tense, with parents insisting they'd never bring their kids back. Some volunteers quit, little by little, though others stepped forward, especially veterans. "If the problem is safety, we can help with that too," they said. Amelia walked through the empty hall, running her fingers along the edge of the table where she'd once lined up toy cars and later given evacuation orders. Now, that same table was covered in plans for the next event, emergency protocols handwritten and scratched through in different colored pens. Cole arrived a few minutes later, carrying an overstuffed folder. They agreed to the pilot program, he said. Events with trained vets on site, escape routes tested, direct contact with local PD. It's a lot of work, but it's the good kind of work. He opened the folder. And that's not all. Among the forms and org charts were documents for a new investigative unit. A mixed team of military and civilian specialists focused on hunting down schemes like Kessler's. Routes, contracts, suspicious authorizations. People with time in the field and behind the scenes. Not just desk-bound rule readers. "We want someone who knows both ends," Cole explained. "Who can read the numbers and also understands what those numbers do to real people. And who's got a personal reason not to let anything slide." He didn't have to say her name. No one else checked all those boxes. Amelia flipped through the pages slowly. Part of her still flinched at anything that smelled like the system that once chewed her up. Another part saw something rare. A chance to use everything she'd been through, including the worst of it, to keep others from being ground down the same way. "If I do this, it's not just to clear my name," she said. "It's to make sure nobody else ends up as the face of a screw-up, while the real decision-maker keeps signing off missions." Kolinadat. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. Outside, kids rode bikes around the block, laughing loud, looping past the center like it was any other building on any other street. Some of them might never fully understand how close they'd come to becoming statistics. In a way, that ignorance was the point. Their world had stayed intact because of a string of hard choices made in seconds. Amelia held out her hand. "All right," she said. But this chimney, if anyone tries to bury me in paperwork, I'm going to yell louder than I ever have." Cole shook her hand, grip firm, deal, redemption. As she stepped outside and looked back one last time, she didn't just see the night of the attack. She saw the moment she'd stopped running from her own story. She understood that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about choosing, day after day, what to do with it. And in that choice, she knew she still had a lot of missions ahead. If this story moved you, then you belong here. At Redemption of America, every story truth. Broken doesn't mean finish nothing. So, make sure you subscribe. Leave your comment about the moment that hit you hardest. And share this video with someone who needs to remember what redemption looks like. Until next time, stay strong, stay honorable, and never forget, America redeems its own.